What's up, everybody? This is Adam from AdMine Analytics, and you're listening to the AdMine Analytics podcast. More people than ever are trying to tie all their marketing data together in a way that helps them actually move the needle for performance. Why do I say actually? Well, because more often than not, tech tools are overpromised, marketing teams are understaffed, and the data just keeps pouring in, which all lead to marketing analytics data that's just not quite helpful enough. On this show, our founder and I discuss all things marketing analytics to help you navigate those complicated waters so you can measure the impact of your marketing and use that data to push your business to the next level. All right, welcome back to another episode of the AdMine Analytics podcast. My name is Adam Collins. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing. I've got our founding engineer with me, Mike Query. In our last episode, we talked about how you can begin the process of categorizing your data. We talked about how difficult it can be to get a first wrangle around all this information that we're exposed to as marketers and things we can do to make our lives easier as those data questions get more and more complex. So we talked about how can we categorize the data. And the first topic in that lane of thinking is what data is there to categorize. So last time we talked about sources of traffic, geographies of traffic, content types or the content topics, and then products and the ways that you would potentially organize and categorize that data. Today, we're going to talk about more of those things, but with this understanding that you get to decide as a marketer how you want to categorize and organize this stuff for the purpose of being able to compare one group of data against another. We're going to get a little more into that today. But the analogy that came to mind as we were kind of discussing this for me, Mike, was I know you have little kids, I have little kids. I oftentimes walk into their room and see it just as a total dumpster fire of mess. And a lot of times I want to say to them, it's up to you how you want to organize this stuff. There are different ways to organize it. There's sort of good, better, and best. Sure, you could put all your figures together and have Lego figures mixed with other type of figures. Or you could say we're going to have Legos over here and Star Wars over here. There's lots of different ways you could organize that stuff. But once it is organized, then keeping it organized and asking yourself questions like, where is that Star Wars character gets a lot easier for you when you want to know where that information is. So with that as our backdrop, so go ahead.
I just got to comment on your analogy. That's the first time I've heard it, and I like that analogy quite a bit. It's something coming from like the engineering and data background. One of the things that we know in data science is that you can take, and I think maybe we even talked about this a little bit in our last podcast, but you can take an algorithm meant to do something. And data science people, scientist people over the years have built algorithms that are good at doing categorizing things or find me something that is similar to this thing. I'll give you some characteristics, find me something that's similar to this thing. You might use those in a scenario of marketing where you go, all right, I got all this data. Here you go, algorithm, build me some categories. Take all these random visits and try and find the things that are in common with one another and like group them for me. And those algorithms are okay, but you know so much more as a marketer, and this is why your analogy with the kids is cool. Like, you know how your customers think better than an algorithm knows how they think. So an algorithm is good at building groups, maybe, or good at analyzing groups, but you're good at knowing how people think. So if you try as a marketer, if you try to say, you know what, forget it, we're just going to buy a tool. I'm not going to think about how to categorize these things. You can get a tool to build you groups that have mathematical similarities or something like that.
Man.
You're going to get so much more utility out of the data if you apply your understanding of the customer. Just like as a kid, if you go, I think about it to one of my kids, I think you ought to do this in figurines and in sports stuff. And your kid goes like, I don't think about it in figurines and sports stuff. I think about it in terms of basketball stuff. And I think about it in terms of soccer stuff. And I want my soccer figurines next to my soccer ball. And I want my basketball figurines next to my basketball. And it's like, if that's the way that your kid's mind works, like that categorization is better. Don't trust that to just some algorithm to do it for you. Or even in maybe another scenario, don't just take the default categorizations that you get in the way you collect your data in Google Analytics, for example, and assume that those categorizations are good, that they represent you. They're really generic ones. You need to make them categorize it the way you think about it or the way your customers think about it even better in order to get to find insights. And the goal is when you've got good categories, then you can compare them against each other and go, oh, interesting. These type of people do this. Those type of people do that. I know now how I can treat them differently.
Yeah, it's interesting. We could probably spend an entire podcast talking about categorizing kids' bedroom stuff and how it relates to data organization. Because when you were talking about that, I thought, oh yeah, like an algorithm tool might organize things by weight. And so you might have like a pillow next to a Lego piece, and that could, based on the algorithm's default methodology, those things would be together. And it's like, no, I, as the business owner, know that Lego piece and pillow might weigh the same, but serve vastly different purposes for my customer. Therefore, they shouldn't be organized that way. And to just take those definitions off the shelf can be problematic for you as a marketer.
Yeah. As data scientists, we've learned that the algorithm can only use the categorization options that you give it in the data. So if you haven't done a little bit of like cleaning and thinking work, and you haven't said things like, you know what, for us, a tablet and a mobile device are literally the same thing. Like that the customer using our technology or looking at our websites, the same thing between those. If those are default categories and you send that to the machine's going to treat them as totally separate. So it doesn't know that you have so much more context. So what we've learned in data science over a few decades is that the data cleaning and categorization operations before you say some algorithm do some fancy thing is way more important than the algorithm doing the fancy thing, because it's only as smart as we feed as the quality of the stuff that we feed it. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So last time we talked about, just to bring it back in terms of now that we've kind of laid that groundwork of the categorization and its importance, we talked about sources, that you can organize sources, and things like that would be social or organic or paid and from different platforms. It's that kind of conversation. We talked about geographies. You might have territories that don't line up with zip codes, or maybe they do, or maybe they overlap with different states. There's lots of different ways that you could organize your geographies. We talked about content as it relates to sort of where people are at in that customer journey. And then we talked about products. And so today we're going to talk about a few more of those things. We're going to talk about devices, customers, time, and lead types. And then if we have a few extra minutes, we might get all the way down into sales treatments. But we'll just get right into it. So you mentioned it a few minutes ago about the device types. You were just kind of using it as kind of your example there. So again, laying that framework, we're marketers and we're going like, hey, we need to categorize this so that we can make sense of data based on separation between devices. So give us some examples of what that might look like.
So a lot of times where you and I are working a bit is we're working in people who are advertising digitally, and sometimes they have other means of revenue generation. So sometimes you can buy online, or sometimes you can become a lead online, and sometimes you can become a lead at a trade show, and sometimes you can buy in a store. So one important thing to do is for your key conversion, if your lead gen leads, if your e-commerce purchases, is just to be able to segment those purchase or lead actions by where they came from. So in your CRM, being able to say, let's just make sure we have a real clear segmentation of those that came from trade shows, those that came from web. And you've seen this looking at CRMs before, that sometimes you get these categorizations that are like this one
came from potato, and you're like, what on earth?
The heck? How did this come from potato? So there's one categorization. Another is when you get into just the digital realm, a lot of times you have app interactions. This is increasingly common in e-commerce, where you have your products that you display on your site, but you're encouraging people to get closer to you and download the app for special promotions and stuff. And so you have app versus web, and that's another big categorization.
I want to double click on that for a second and say, like, we'll play with some live talking point there, where you would say it would be meaningful to know what the customer looks like who came to you through a download this app to get a 10% discount right now sort of experience, versus somebody who came to your website and created an account and did, interact and gave you that information that way. And what we're talking about here is you want to be able to categorize, like, those two people might have given you the exact same information for very similar reasons, but because they came in through two very different methods, there's likely going to be some difference in how they behave and interact with you. Is that fair? Is that a fair
definitely
double
that.
click? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely that. And it starts to become, you have also the scenario of device category that matters. So apps are most commonly, like, you're thinking about the mobile interactions. And on your website, you have the desktop and the mobile customer, but we as humans, as customers or potential customers, we're using those at different times, at different points in the buying cycle. So being able to segment us in our behavior by, you know me, I've got your app, I'm downloaded, versus I've met you, but it's the first time on mobile on your website, or being able to just compare me as like an app user versus a web user and my behavior in those two scenarios will allow us to see different parts of the customer journey. So that's just a device
Interesting.
categorization there
Cool.
that makes sense.
Okay, so within devices, there's sort of the highest levels like the web versus the app. And then
Yep.
as you drill down into web, you might have desktop, mobile, tablet. I think you
Yep.
mentioned smart TV in
Yeah.
previous
Yep.
conversations. And so the idea there is to be able to segment the audiences so you can compare meaningful interaction at that level between people in those who are interacting with you in those
Yeah.
different
One of the things
ways.
I used to think about too, so there's a couple other thoughts here that come to mind as we talk about it, but one of the things I used to think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when it used to, when the average advertiser had as much mobile traffic as they had desktop traffic, now it's most e-com, at least, advertisers have mostly mobile traffic. But back when it was split about 50-50, you'd hear people say things like, well, our conversion rate is this, and our conversion rate's changing over time. And I would always think like, oh my gosh, if you're talking about that by looking at all of your data together, your desktop and mobile, then there's, the experiences are so different that you can't even compare them. You can't even say our average desktop conversion rate and mobile conversion rate is. It's like you have a desktop conversion, you have a mobile conversion rate. You can't even average them together.
Right.
They're so different.
Okay.
And sometimes people will go, oh, our conversion rate is declining over time. And it's like, that's the only reason is you're getting more and more mobile traffic that has a lower conversion rate over time.
Right.
And you're like, oh, our conversion rate's tanking. It's like, because you're talking about your overall conversion rate,
Yeah.
you should be slicing the data by that category before you even start to have that discussion.
So it's worth it. There's different levels of that you would pay attention to this with different depth based on the size of your company and like sort of what your goals for interaction are. For some brands listening to us, they're going to go, yes, absolutely. This is something that we would want to think about. And for others, they're going to go like at the mobile to desktop level. That's sort of like the basic level I would think everybody needs to think about separation. And between those and all the way down to different screen sizes or different mobile device carriers, it just depends on how much your brand uses those devices to interact. But to assume that the interaction is the same across those devices is very wrong, which is why we're suggesting that they need to be categorized.
Yeah. There's another couple types of categorization. And so I'm going to talk about one that's deeper in that bucket, kind of because you hinted at it, and then one that's broader. The deeper one is you can talk about things in terms of screen resolutions. You can talk about things in terms of different browser. And you can talk about things in terms of different browser versions. Now, a lot of times performance isn't different there unless you've done something pretty harebrained in your development where you like some sort of styling rule applies on Safari and it doesn't apply on Chrome. And those things, over the years, those things are shrinking. Most of those styling considerations are the same across devices. But so you can get super granular and go, well, like maybe our layout's a little different between phone that's 400 pixels wide and 430 pixels wide. And it's like, well, that might be true depending on how you have things set up. So looking at conversion rates based on your screen widths especially, but your resolutions is useful if you're really into deep testing.
Yeah.
Another reason though that stuff's kind of important is because now we have one of the things that makes data bad a lot is when you get spikes of non-human traffic. So we call it bot traffic. But there are various reasons that you might get spikes for that. You might get a spike in bot traffic because something is crawling your site that's trying to index it for use someplace else. So as a search engine, Google's got crawlers that are out there. Yahoo's got them. Microsoft's got them. LinkedIn's got them to try to decide what your site does based on your company's profile link. There's tons and tons of profiling sites that will try to look at your website to analyze its content, to try to position you in some sort of a directory or something. And then there's the malicious kind that are like trying to, overwhelm you with traffic or something. In a lot of those scenarios, you want to, in all of those scenarios, when it's non-human, you want to be able to exclude that from your marketing data for review. So if you get a giant spike in somebody who set up some developer who set up an automated test to make sure that your homepage loads, you don't want to count that as something that affects your people-based conversion rates. So the way you filter that stuff out, there is an industry index that Google subscribes to in its analytics that keeps track of the IP addresses of the machines that visit websites. But that's not very accurate, and those things change all the time. So a lot of times what you want to do is filter out the traffic based on some of its qualities. If I build a bot that goes to scrape your website to see what your recent offer on your homepage is, it's highly likely that I'm building that bot to emulate a browser for a specific browser version for a specific screen resolution. And so every time I visit you, it's the same thing. So when you get a spike of those and you want to filter it out of your traffic, most of the time you can do that by its browser version, its browser, the user agent string, and its screen resolution. The combination of those things usually can help isolate something to get rid of. So there's another reason to have some more slicing categories go deep.
Cool. Let's move on to customers. So we talked a little bit about this. So customers, it's important I want to throw this out initially right away. These are people who have already purchased from you. And the thought exercise here is, how would you group these already purchased from you people into similar clusters for the purpose of looking at performance trends? And so we had written some down there. We talked about a little bit about like new versus, or like a repeat and how many repeat types of things, purchase sizes, job titles. But let's just throw out some more, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the more meaningful ones.
Yeah, I'm interested in the ones that you find interesting too. Is you spend a lot of time thinking about what the categories of people are that you're interacting with. So the things that I thought about that you most often see people segmenting either their e-commerce data or their CRM data by is the products that are purchased, the content that's been consumed, and maybe even recently consumed, like recent content engagement by topic or something. The offers that have been presented to a customer. This customer's received this coupon. This customer's never gotten one. You see customers segmented by their response rates, and not just as a performance indicator, but response rates by reach out method. So like these customers we know have high response rates on email. Therefore, they're our email type of like preferred method of contact. You can compare email and call and SMS and in-person sort of reach outs. Cohorted by when they became a customer, so slicing them by their date of acquisition. It's a lot of times your marketing messaging has changed. Their original value proposition might be different than the way you're talking about things now. Slicing them or categorizing them by their average monthly or annual value, or their average lifetime or their lifetime value, by their activity levels. So if you got an app and you want a lot of people coming all the time to consume whatever it is you've built, you can group people together by how often they are doing that. And then you kind of started to mention some of the personas things like job, if it's B2B, job titles, company size. If it's more direct to consumer, you might categorize by age or by gender, or those sort of things.
I think there's the way that I think about that. If you just plopped me down and said, day one, how would you do this at company you just walked into? Some of the questions I would start asking are like around the customer's value to us as a brand. And I might think of questions like, yes, order size might be a thing, but I would also be wondering, just because somebody orders a big number of things, how much work did it take for us to fulfill on that versus maybe there's a group of customers who buy things from us that we have a really high margin on that don't cost us much to fulfill on. And maybe there's something interesting within that group versus a group that buys a really complicated product that takes a lot of our follow-up support in order to fulfill effectively. And I think about, there was a brand that I worked for previously who had one such product that I thought, the margin on this product is so good and the utility of this product is awesome, but we're not pushing it as much as I thought we should be. And it was because it had this bad knock on it that it wasn't as high of an average order value as like some other product lines were. But so it's things like that. And then looking at those and going, what is it about, what are the similarities amongst this buying group that would allow me to message or nurture more of them and use that for the purpose of, and further down, I think there's another one that came to mind is of your high value customers, regardless of your cost to fulfill on that, either time or resource wise, but it's what's the relationship between their interaction with content and their order sizes. So like, how much content are they consuming before they do what? And is it a lot of consumption for a lot of product, and then maybe like a little, like what does that look like? And are there avenues in there where we go like, it takes, what if we, and then you'd try things and you'd go, there's only this much content to produce these kinds of customers. What would happen if we made more content in that area? Would we get more customers, less? Does it not have an impact? So that's how those would be some of the initial thoughts for me on the B2B side. One of my favorite articles that I read.
Let me pipe in one real quick.
Yeah.
When we were talking about products, like the margin of products, I would say there's two slices there potentially. There's the way that you slice the fulfillment of a customer, like the cost to fulfill, that may be related to qualities of that customer. This customer of a customer type is hard to fulfill on, therefore our margin is lower. But you also hinted at product lines, and I would say that's a way, we talked about products in our last episode, but that's a way you would segment products, is by margin category. So that's there's two slices there that you could see could produce insights on either side of, oh, it's interesting, maybe we ought to press this product more, or maybe we ought to back off on this customer type less because they turn into margin. So anyway.
And you might hear that stuff and go, no, I already know all these sticky pain points around my customer base, and it's not going to, influence the way that we would interact with them. We're just stuck with this is the client base and this is our market, and it's tough to fulfill in our market. So those might be some knowns for you, but there are definitely some, those are the things that I think about. What I was going to say is, I came across an article where they were talking about customer segmentation from email sends, and it was an e-commerce company. And what they found really interesting was that one of the first things that they wanted to do was identify which customers responded to discount emails versus which ones didn't, based on the hypothesis or the premise that like most e-com people operate under this idea that like, oh, the only type of email we would send out would be if we're offering a discount on this particular product. That's what people want to see. And the thought was like, well, no, maybe it's just a new product and you have a group of customers that would buy it at retail regardless, but yet you're giving them a discount because you think that they need it in order to buy. And so they had segmented out people that needed a discount in order to buy and people who didn't. So the same email would end up going out to these different groups. And there was the don't need a discount to buy and the need a discount to buy. And that's a huge direct impact to the like overall revenue by just being able to be visual on that level of organizing your customer. You're organizing it by stickiness to email discount sort of vibes. So I thought that was an interesting one.
I'm gonna put in one more plug. We did it last episode. I'm doing it again, to late data binding over early data binding. And let me suggest what I mean by that again. It's so much easier for you to be able to say, oh, have that thought and go, interesting. I wonder which people respond to discount versus just normal update emails. Who needs a discount to buy and who doesn't? It's easier to categorize that after the fact that you've sent emails than to have to have planned in order to ever answer that question, in order to have planned it when you send the emails. So early data binding world would be, we have to categorize every email we send before we send any emails as a discount email or not a discount email. And then we can answer that question later. Late data binding is saying we've built ourselves a data system where we can go look at our emails and we can say, if we sent 300 emails in the last year, in a 10-minute operation, somebody can go through and go, that's a discount one, that's not one, that's not. Then when you've built an interface with the data for your people that allows you to categorize the data after the fact, now as soon as you have that question, you go, I wonder if that's a different behavior. It takes you, if you've built a system like that, then you can, in 10 to 15 minutes, ask that question, categorize the data appropriately, and get a historical answer. If you built a system that relies primarily on early data binding, now you have to wait until you send the next 3 months worth of rounds of emails before you can even collect the information to judge.
Interesting.
So just
Quick plug.
quick plug for thinking about late data binding.
This segment is brought to you by late data binding. Okay. The next one we talked about is time and being able to categorize things by time. And I think there's some, I heard that one. I'm like, okay, what do you mean? And then the explanation made sense. I mean, so I'm going to leave it to you to kind of give us the time segments, and then we'll kind of talk about how they would apply.
Yeah. So it's, and this, you think about, it's not, now we have to shift the lens of the thing that we're categorizing. And we're talking about categorizing time, not people anymore. So shift our attention, not talking about categorizing time. The way you might categorize time is you might categorize it by seasonality. So if you're a B2B seller or advertiser, a lot of times weekdays are very different than weekends. Having a capability to slice or categorize your data and compare performance and cost and engagement by weekday, weekend can tell you a lot about where you can save or double down. You might some other subcategories of seasonality. You might categorize by holidays or not holidays. You might categorize by, sometimes we sell snowblowers, and so there's our on season and our off season, being able to categorize time by the seasons that we operate in. Yeah, I thought maybe.
Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but we were just talking with someone who's a distributor of landscape products. And I like it because those are just grown-up toys, and I like talking about them and thinking about driving them around and all that kind of stuff. But as you were just talking about the seasonality of things, and I think like, oh, it'd be interesting to know, like, we all know that at Home Depot, they're usually trying to blow out the snow blowers right about now, because we're heading into grass clipping season. So it would be really interesting to understand the margins on sale or product lines, that kind of stuff, off a snowblower in October, November, when like the weather's just starting to change. And then in thick winter, when it's like we're here and you're hitting pummeled and it's like 8 times you've had to go out there and shovel and now you want a snowblower, versus like late in the season when you're trying to like get rid of those things and being able to compare the exact same audience, the exact same, like, I'm just picking here, device type, you line up all those things the same, but I want to be able to then see, what about if it's in this time period? What about if it's in this time, and get a sense of like what that behavior looks like.
Yeah. So that's the point. You're talking about mixing categorizations. So when you say like, oh, I can compare my products against the time segments. And the point is, you get powerful as an advertiser when you can make those comparisons. If it becomes super burdensome, if you go, oh my gosh, every time I got to do this, I got to go pick out the dates.
It's like 10 hours worth of analysis stuff.
Then you never actually get to the learnings. But if you build the categorizations into your data or think about them, then that makes it so that when you start to ask and answer questions, it becomes quick. And now you can go, wow, I can ask that question pretty quickly.
Cool.
So we talked about seasonality, categorization of time.
Yep.
Another thing that you can do is cohorting. So we kind of hinted at this a little bit from the customer side, but a lot of times your marketing messaging changes during a promotion or during, you've got extra inventory. And so now you're cutting prices, or this is like, we do a President's Day sort of sale thing. And so people who meet us during those times where we're in promotion versus just our normal run-of-the-mill times may behave differently. So it's sometimes nice to categorize your time as promotion time, not promotion time. And that just depends if you're running those sort of things. The other categorization is more of time, is more like a bucketing based on if you do fiscal things, like if your fiscal year doesn't match your calendar year, then when you categorize time, when you're thinking about building the capability to analyze, it's really, really nice to have that built into your system where you can say, let's talk about things in terms of our actual fiscal quarters. We met a company once that I actually liked this idea, but it was just peculiar. They chose to have their quarters, they called them 4-4-5 quarters. So that what they would do is have a quarter or a month of 4 weeks, another month defined by 4 weeks, and another month defined by 5 weeks. So what it did is it made each quarter have the same number of weekends and weekdays in it. So when they did a quarter over quarter comparison, there was never any fudge factor due to weekends and weekdays.
Oh,
but the weird thing was when you said like, what month of the year is it? It's like month 1 that goes from like January 1st to like January 28th. And then month 2 goes from like January 29th to like February. And so it's like, oh my gosh, the months are gnarly, but the quarter comparisons are nice. it's nice to have. And so they would pull reports all the time, and they go, what was this quarter versus last year? Every time they did that, somebody had to go to their wiki or something, look up, and 10 minutes later they'd come back with what the dates were for the quarter of last year. And so it slowed down their question answering dramatically, because they didn't have in the reporting that they were looking at the time categorization of their specific quarter definition. Nice definition, but when they didn't apply it in
practice.
the reporting, torture. Yeah, torture.
Interesting. Cool. Okay. Any others in time that come to you top of mind?
No,
Okay.
that's time.
Let's move on to lead types. So we talked about there's a couple different ways, a couple different layers to this. You might have, I'm going to cue us up, and then we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper into this. But it's how can I organize lead stuff in ways that are meaningful for me to compare behavior between those things. And that's super vague, and it's that way on purpose because it's different for every business. Mm-hmm. And so, I'll use a previous example from my working life of, working at Listen Tech. And so we had, a lead could become a lead through a chat form or through like a lead form on a page, or they could call us. And we kind of had to decide, okay, well, those are the ways in which someone can reach out. And that's what I was talking about potato earlier, is sometimes people would put lead source as chat. And it's like, well, source is kind of like not that. I get what they were doing, but I can't go buy more chat. That was just what they used to become a lead. And I wanted my source to tell me where I could go get more of that thing if I had infinite resources. And so that's just a couple, so you have people that came in from a form versus other ways of interacting. Then there were other things like if somebody...
Can I pause you on that one for a second?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of like, sometimes you see this, that's just, it's bad nomenclature. You kind of see bad meaning. Source indicates where somebody came from. Medium indicates how they came. So like putting chat in source is like, they didn't come from chat.
Sure.
They came by chat. They came from something else by chat.
Right.
And so categorizing your thinking about how to categorize lead types by the medium by which they came to you versus the source is more back in our traffic discussion where we're talking about where did we acquire them from?
Right. Yeah. Then you have we talked about this before, but like asset type, where it's did they give us lead information from a white paper or from a tool that we have online that they were using, or because they were signing up for some e-course series that we have. And that's interesting because there's just right off the bat, some of those things are more cumbersome than others to ingest if I'm the lead and to interact with if I'm the lead. For example, it's much easier for someone to sign up on a newsletter in an email, and therefore you would assume that person is a little less serious about what you do than somebody who has signed up for like a 5-day e-course to learn about, XYZ thing that you're awesome at. And even that wouldn't be as good as somebody who came and, filled out some directly like contact me right now and I want to talk. So it's categorizing that stuff so that you can see and understand the performance differences between those things.
Yeah. And it's all about being able to align your analysis to the customer journey. So like you're just saying, somebody who's saying, hey, I would just like to see that spec sheet, and you kind of annoyed me by asking me to give you my email in order to see it. Like, fine, I'll give you my email. That person's placed in the customer journey, moving from awareness towards consideration, is way different than the person who says, can I talk to your sales guy? They mean something different. So,
and to call them both leads is not great.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard because then what you end up doing. So this comes back to the categorizations again. I made the comment earlier about the device. It's like looking at our conversion rate and not separating mobile and desktop is like, in fact, there's a data word for it. It's called Simpson's paradox. It's when you can't see the difference in behavior until you slice it, or you see a difference in behavior that you think is a real thing until you slice it and you realize that there's actually two different things going on. And so that's what you're trying to avoid, is that sort of scenario going, oh my gosh, our lead to close rate's way down. Like, it's only way down because we did something where we got a ton more white paper leads. That's a great thing. But
Yeah.
because we're calling all leads the same thing, and we didn't, and our sales leads didn't change at all, our overall lead to converted rate went down. Then it's so people start, raising the alarm flags and like, hold on. It's because we're
Right.
not categorizing
Right.
appropriately.
Yeah. Okay. Give us a one sentence on the bonus thing that we talked about with sales treatments as a thing that you could categorize. Give me a one sentence description on that.
Yeah.
And
So
then, yeah, go ahead.
a lot of companies have the beginning of their marketing effort is when somebody becomes a lead online, and then so much changes once the sales team is involved. We have different scripts, we have different people, we have different pitches, we have different closers, we have different openers and setters. And so it's like all that from the sales world perspective, from the CRM, now they're known people perspective, from the managing pipeline perspective, there's a ton of ways that you can slice the data to isolate differences in performance. And you're looking for things like this script performs better than that script, this sales team performs better than that sales team, this closer performs better than that closer. And the capability to slice those things is useful. A lot of times the CRM system just gives you those. Those are just built in to your tooling, and you don't have to think too hard about it.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's kind of give people, I'm trying to think about, we've talked about some of the theoretical approaches to doing this.
Yeah.
How does this get represented? When you've talked about like when you've built your data system properly, or like,
Yeah.
and we're talking about, we just gave you the thought exercise of saying, look, go through and categorize source, geo, content, products, devices, customers, time, lead types, and sales treatment. So more than 5, less than 10 things for you to go and give some thought to how you would categorize them. Not by where they're at in the journey, but just what might be different about one version of this than another that would be interesting to you. So again, you go through it. So if I came back to you and I said, okay, Mike, I'm the director of sales and marketing at AdMine. I've gone through all these different things. I've come up with some of my different categories, and here's my reasoning. Now what? Like, how do I go from that thought exercise to this world where it's like me being able to analyze the data?
So this is I'm gonna, you've already heard a little bit of this again, but the way to do this, when you start to think about the breadth of what you just said, how much you would have to do, there's two really important paradigms: the early and the late data binding paradigm. And I just want to talk about those for a second. If you leaned in early, what you would do is you would say, let's go, if we want to categorize our emails, let's go to our email system, let's figure out how to create a custom parameter in those emails, and then let's apply that to every email we send now and in the future. You wanted to categorize your channels, you'd go to your analytics system or UTM parameters, and you go, okay, we want to group these things together. We're going to create a new parameter called paid branded, and we'll make that now, and then at some point in the future we might be able to leverage it. If you were to think about that.
What you're saying there is that the early binding is we're going to put some sort of mechanism into the click that happens, or into the action that happens. We're going to plant something in there, so that in the back end we can go look for that thing that we planted. That tells us it belongs in this particular group.
That's right. And there are things like email template parameters, UTM parameters. If you catch yourself thinking, oh, I could do this with a workflow in my CRM, that's early data binding stuff. It's like, when the lead comes in, if it has this or this or this, categorize it this way. That stuff is impossible to ever rework, because once you've put it out there and when the data gets collected, it's data that gets categorized at the time it's collected. Then it's always collected that way. So
I've always lived in the early data binding world, and it's super frustrating.
So frustrating. Late data binding is about getting the data and then having the capability to manipulate it after the fact. This is almost always about getting a warehouse, centralizing the data, and then you can always go back through and go, what was the title of those last 300 emails? Oh, that was promotion, not promotion, promotion, not promotion, promotion, not promotion. And you can categorize the data after it comes in by rules. And then you have the capability to get answers from it quick. These ideas are great ideas. The categorization ideas are ideas that help you to slice the data so that you can find things you don't know, so you can change the way that you get performance. If it takes you a month or 2 months to categorize the data to answer a business question, your competitors aren't doing that. They're answering the questions in an hour or 2 or 15 or 20 minutes. And they're learning, and then they're acting before you've even had a chance to answer the question. So late data binding gives you the capability, which means centralizing the data in a warehouse and something that's manipulatable. You can't do that in Google Analytics. You can't do it in your CRM. You can't do it in your email platform. You can't go recategorize past performance. In a warehouse, you can. There's tooling. We've talked to us about how to make that not a huge data engineering thing, but there's tooling to make that possible and make your learnings 10x, 20x, 100x sometimes faster.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that's it for today. We appreciate you spending some time with us, and we look forward to having you in our next episode.